Thank you, Paul. Just figured out how to unmute myself at long last. Yeah, kind words, Paul. Thank you for the introduction. Yeah, I'm always pleased to support Yorkshire branch in whatever way I can, and looking through the people attending tonight. There's a hell of a lot of people here who've supported me over the years as well, sort of thing. And, you know, hopefully this talk will be an interesting one. It'll be interesting for me because I'm kind of out of my comfort zone a bit. And it's kind of, I like doing talks I've not done before because they're always new. They always set you thinking in different ways. And with moths, I'm really, really well aware that there are people here tonight who know a hell of a lot more on the subject than I do, sort of thing. So I hope if I get anything wrong, I'll be excused, and hopefully it'll be interesting. It's a knockabout of ideas. You'll see the question mark after the title, because a moth conservation strategy for Yorkshire is certainly something that could be progressed, and hopefully by batting a few ideas backwards and forwards, it'll put people's minds in trains of thought in place as to how that might work. As I say, I hope it's interesting. Let's let it roll and see how the evening goes. There'll be time for questions at the end. I've no idea how long the talk will run for because I've not done it before. Paul assures me he'll pull the plug if I go on too long. So let's go. Okay, and now, oops, there we go. So as I mentioned, I'm not a moth expert, particularly the little jobs that are on the screen there. I'm a bit, I struggle along with the best of us when it comes to the tiny moths in particular, and some of the larger ones. Any of you guys here tonight who've processed some of my records over the years will probably realize that there are limitations to my powers of identification, shall we say, but I do my best, as do we all. I'm not an out-and-out mother. One of my passions is sea trout fishing. So when I'm not out with the moth trap on a summer's night, I'll be plodging about in chest waders down the weir or on the Tyne, fishing for these guys, sea trout. So plus I have a home life. So my time is divided between lots and lots of things in the summer, which is probably why I never ever really conquer the moth world and get to know my way around it in the way I probably should. So why write a conservation strategy? This is a good starting point. Sorry, I'm just having to move a few toolbars about because I can't actually see my own slide. Right. So writing a conservation strategy, very importantly, it sets out priorities. It identifies a set of species, a set of actions, you know, a kind of identifies where efforts and resources should be directed, if you like. And really importantly, it's a useful channel of communication sort of thing. It enables an organisation such as Butterfly Conservation to be able to set out its own priorities internally, but also, you know, given that we collectively are pretty much expert in this field, makes that knowledge available, that expertise available to other organisations, and essentially ensures that they too commit the resources, conservation effort in the way that it can be best used, sort of thing, if that makes sense. So you might have been hoping for a talk tonight. You might have seen the word moths and thought, oh, there's going to be loads and loads of pictures of moths and all these wonderful night-flying creatures, which there will be to an extent, I'll be quite honest with you, sort of thing. But you might find out where the word strategy was the one you should have focused on, because you might be actually seeing lots about spreadsheets and paperwork and records and all the rest of it, sort of thing. So it's kind of, you know, bear with me a bit. It could be hard going in places, but stick with it and hopefully it'll prove interesting. So in terms of a conservation strategy for Yorkshire, a starting point might be Butterfly Conservation's regional and national strategies. Now, these are documents that were pulled together in 2016. The 2 tiers of documents, essentially, both halfway through a 10-year time frame. The first tier covers the devolved nations and English regions, and the top tier is the UK strategy as a whole. So the top tier, which I'm not going to speak much about tonight, sets out national priorities, if you like, deals with the real core species, if you like, of conservation effort throughout the UK. But the bit I'm going to look at more is the North of England conservation strategy sort of thing. And I'll take you through that. It has been available on the BC website, but I'm aware that hell of a lot of people are still not familiar with this document. And I'll talk you through it a little bit, because actually it's a really, really good piece of work. I've put effort into it myself. I was ably supported by Butterfly and Moth recorders from all of the Northern English counties, which I kind of cover as direct part of my job, if you like. So the northern counties I'm talking of are Northumberland, Durham and Yorkshire. And on the other side, on the dark side of the Pennines, if you like, we've got Cumbria, Lancashire and Cheshire sort of thing. And all the county recorders, butterflies and moths, chipped in with their knowledge of how species were doing, because it was at that time, bear in mind the time frame, the Moth Atlas, I can't show you on the screen, but the Moth Atlas that was published recently wasn't available, sort of thing. So there was quite a considerable amount of trying to balance priorities from different counties, because I mean Yorkshire's a massive county, as you're all aware, but the north of England is far bigger, sort of thing, and the suite of species across that piece of land is pretty immense, sort of thing. It took some real efforts to kind of narrow down to what we wanted to look at. So in terms of the contents of the English regional strategies, let's have a look at this. Of course, no one here tonight will be interested in butterflies, but the first bit of it is list the priority butterfly species, and these are kind of they're pretty well known, sort of thing. The priorities are pretty standout. We're dealing with a small group of species, some of which are really rare, both locally and nationally. So we've got 4 really high priority species that head the list: pearl border fritillary, high brown fritillary, marsh frit and Duke of Burgundy, and work down through a series of lower priorities. And the prioritization is all done on occupancy of tetrads, hectads, and rates of decline, so on and so forth. It's got all the listings under various red lists and UK BAT lists and all the rest of it. And for the butterflies, they're mainly listed in every category, sort of thing, these rare ones. But that's nearly it for butterflies tonight. I'm not going to dwell on that. But deeper into the document, page 2, if you like, there's a list of priority moth species. There's 29 species that are high priority, and then another suite of about, I think, getting on 60 species that are slightly more widespread, slightly less rare, perhaps, sort of thing. But I haven't got the full list there, but going across from column to column, we've got common name, scientific name, the ABH numbers, the listing in the biodiversity action plans, so on and so forth, prioritization of threats. And we've also got a kind of little table that shows the occurrence in the 6 northern counties. NRR is no recent records, as was in 2016. And you can see, say, for example, the Forester moth is present in all 6 counties, apart from Cheshire, where it's believed to be extinct, sort of thing. So you kind of get the flavour of that. It sets out a list of moth priorities. And again, these are evaluated in terms of the number of squares on the map that they're present in, if you like, rates of decline, so on and so forth. So an example of one of the second highest tier of species, for example, would be Blomer's rivulet. I don't know if you can see that, but essentially this is a moth that has caterpillars that feed on elm, and it's kind of declining less like widespread than it was. Moving on to through the next part of the strategy, if you like. The document also identifies how many species are present in different landscapes. It sets out a series of priority landscapes. So we've got things like West Cumbria Coastal Plain, and if you check down, it's got the number of high priority butterflies, the number of medium priority butterflies, and the number of high priority moth species. And there's a rough guide as to which landscapes, if you like, support the greatest diversity of rare species, butterflies and moths. So, for example, we look at the totals, we've got 21 and 19 for Morecambe Bay Limestone and South Cumbria Low Fells, respectively. Those areas are kind of top of the league, if you like, but we can kind of switch across to Yorkshire. These are the three main Yorkshire landscapes. We've got the Yorkshire Dales and Craven Lowlands. We've got 11 species there. Really high scoring for rare moths. We've got the North York Moors, which has obviously got some specialities, and the Yorkshire Wolds, which is probably, got far fewer sort of thing. I think we've got chalk carpet as the priority moth species, and probably grayling, dingy skipper as the priority, but high priority butterflies, to give you an example. In terms of the colour coding, because you'll see that some of the squares are coloured in, anything coloured green on this list is kind of full conservation delivery. That would mean that there's a kind of fairly intensive surveys have been done. Sites are perhaps monitored to see how the numbers change over time. And there's also been some habitat management for those species where we know what the requirements are. There's been kind of management undertaken, and that moth there, Anania phenebris, the white spotted sable, which I should have put a picture up of, actually lives in the limestone woodlands in Morecambe Bay, where we've done a hell of a lot of work over the years, ostensibly for high brown fritillaries, but that species has also benefited, and it is well surveyed for, well monitored, and it gets the management it needs, basically. So that's kind of coloured green because things are good. Squares that are coloured grey, and there's a hell of a lot of these, are where we have really very little knowledge about what conservation efforts been taken, how well the distributions are known, whether the population trends are known. Anything grey, there's a hell of a lot of information lacking. And yellow, we would code for limited conservation delivery. There's nothing on this square, on this set of squares, that's coloured yellow, but we might now be looking, for example, let's say small egger, which Sam Newton, I don't know if Sam's here tonight, has done a hell of a lot of survey work for in the North York Moors landscape sort of thing. So again, Sam's work has suggested possible ways forward that we could monitor the species. Perhaps we could do web counts in the way that we do for, say, marsh fritillaries in the Morecambe Bay limestones. So we could potentially colour small yellow egger yellow, because we know a lot more about it than we did when the plan was drawn up. Let's have a look through. Yellow ring carpet, Kay's doing work in the Yorkshire Dales on that. Potentially, again, we could start moving that forward. I know she's got volunteers who'll be surveying various sites for it this year, and as we learn a little bit more about it, there would be a case for kind of advancing, upping it in the list of actions, if you like, as to what's being done with it. The chalk carpet, for example, in County Durham, we've done quite a bit of work up there, revisiting old sites, seeing whether it's still present, which it seems to be, touch wood. And we've managed to get access to a couple of quarry sites where we'd never had permission to survey, and we've found chalk carpets there. So we've kind of moved things forward on that. But, it's kind of a document that kind of identifies the level of action and what needs to be done, sort of thing. In terms of the priority landscapes, I don't know how much detail you can see on your screen, sort of thing, but we've got a series of high priority landscapes. These are they're sort of big hitters, if you like. We've got North York Moors, we've got the Yorkshire Dales, so Yorkshire's quite well provisioned for these. We've got Morecambe Bay Limestone, South Cumbria Low Fells, Cumbria High Fells, and the Solway Woods over that side, sort of thing. So between Yorkshire and Cumbria, the bulk of the highest priority landscapes are situated there. What you probably can't see is we've also included some important sites that are certainly don't qualify as landscapes. They're sites that have got key species. So we've got Strensel Common there, for example, which obviously has got dark-bordered beauty, small chocolate tip, which is another of the listed priority moth species in the regional strategy. There's Bishop Wood there, which of course has got Argent and Sable, Thorn Hatfield Moors, which has got large heath butterfly, and Sundew Plume, so on and so forth, which isn't actually in the strategy, but it would be if we were kind of starting from re-evaluating it. And there's quite a scatter of sites through the north of England that are on there, if you can see the detail on them. There's also a kind of moving further on, table 5 we're on now, sort of thing, for various species. And I've just taken a chunk of a few lines of the spreadsheet, sort of thing, just to give you a flavour. So things like Argent and Sable, these are actions that are kind of have been identified, and things that have been done, and things that we need doing, sort of thing. So for Argent and Sable, we've identified a need for survey and monitoring, which Terry and other helpers have been doing at Bishop Wood, which is great. Dentated Pug, which is another one. These are just selected, sort of thing. And again, Alistair, if Alistair's here tonight, has been doing a lot of work surveying at Askham Bog, and Dentated Pug is one of the species that comes up regularly in the trap there. Marsh Carpet, we've had no joy in finding, but we are putting the survey work in. We can't monitor it until we find out it's still present in Yorkshire. But again, we can try and ensure that the site or sites where it may be present receive the management they need to kind of maintain the habitat. And barred tooth striped, we've also got down for research, because there's been quite a bit of research done. And, you know, across the entire document, the list of actions, surveys, monitoring, research, data analysis and management shine through again and again and again, because these are the kind of types of actions that underpin conservation work and make it all hang together and be as focused and directed and as scientific as we can possibly get it, to ensure that the species that need it most get the attention they deserve. If you want to have a look at these strategies, go on the Butterfly Conservation website, and if you put in the search box strategy, it will lead you through it. There'll be all sorts of strategies in there, but keep going through them and you will come across the North of England Regional Conservation Strategy. And you know, you'll get to see exactly what I'm talking about. And although it covers all the North of England counties, it is a starting point for if anyone felt there was a need to kind of make a more Yorkshire-centric document. It would be a kind of starting point to look at. I'm sure it can be improved upon. If I was to redraft it now, I wouldn't do it exactly the same as it was done then, but it's still a really, really useful tool, and it's helped in so many ways with quite a bit of the work I've been doing. And I'll kind of lead you through that, and you can see where I'm coming from with it. We mentioned research for barred tooth stripe. This was a project that we did with the University of Kent, where they developed a pheromone lure for barred tooth stripe, which has proved very, very effective means of luring the males of this species, who are drawn to the synthetic pheromone that mimics the scent produced by the females. So you can kind of, you know, you can leave one of these plastic traps out, and the moths are drawn to it, and you can kind of determine whether the moth is present or not. If you haven't seen pheromones in action sort of thing and how the traps look when they're working, we've got this little clip on the right hand side. This is it's not bad tooth stripe. This is for six-belted clearwing, and if this works, yeah, you can see the trap on the right. Those are the male six-belted clearwings that have been attracted by the lure. Literally, I put that trap out, which has got like a little funnel that allows the moth to drop down and be retained in the little bottom bit of the trap, if you like. And that had been out literally seconds when those clearwings started appearing. I literally just clicked record on my phone, and that number had been pulled out of vegetation. Really, really interesting, impressive to see. So we mentioned, I mentioned at the beginning, why write a strategy? We went through, hopefully you'll have seen from how the document's set out what it includes, the North of England strategy. Not all strategies have to be the same, but I found that one works quite well. But the last point was it's a useful communication channel. It helps other organisations, other people. It's a useful tool to kind of get volunteers engaged. It essentially promotes the activities that butterfly conservation would like to see other people engage with. That makes sense. So it's still a process in the making, really, sort of thing. We're 5 years into it, and it's kind of, you know, some people are aware of it, some people aren't. I always try and promote it to partner organisations. If people ask what's in their area, what they should be conserving, I say, have you looked at this document, sort of thing. And 3 examples that show how it's been useful and how it's been used are listed below. We've got the Yorkshire Dales National Park, who are updating their local biodiversity action plan, which essentially does much the same as our strategy document, except it obviously includes more than butterflies and moths. And it kind of, it's how that process is integrated with what we've been doing. There's a Cumbria Nature Recovery pilot that I'll explain a little bit more about as we go into that. And the third one is up in County Durham, where the county council has been re-evaluating how it should designate county wildlife sites, which I'll explain each of these processes as we go through them, sort of thing, and hopefully you'll see that it does come in handy, sort of thing, the groundwork that we've done with the regional strategies. So we start with the Yorkshire Dales National Park. We've worked with the National Park for a long time. We've had a really strong partnership with them over the years. Historically, they had a few butterfly species listed in their biodiversity action plan. They were very, very keen to figure out which moths might be included. So using the regional strategy, we were able to point them in the direction of least minor, forester moth, heath rivulet. Sorry, heath rivulet's the one on the top left. This is yellow ring carpet. That's chestnut coloured carpet. That's a juniper feeder. Barred tooth stripe, which was the one we were talking about the pheromones with. Least minor, which is its caterpillars feed on glaucous sedge, and forester moth, which is present at a single site in Wensleydale in the Dales. And straight away, they're quite happy to kind of incorporate those species, if you like, onto the list, their list of priorities, things that they would regard as being of high conservation value in the Yorkshire Dales landscape. So it's worked really well. And a kind of further spin-off, if you like, is Kay's Limestone Lepidoptera project, where we were able to put together a bid to the, I can't remember what the name of it is now, Heritage Lottery Fund, as was. And they basically have funded Kay to do some work with getting volunteers engaged with surveying northern brown argus and small pearl-bordered fritillary butterfly, which were two of the original Yorkshire Dales elbap species, but also the 6 moths that we showed on the previous slide, which is great. And there's Kay busy preparing wild privet cuttings sort of thing, because barred-tooth striped larvae feed quite a lot on young ash. As you know, the ash trees are taking a hit from dieback. So if we can kind of promote an understory in ash woodlands that includes privet, which is the other host plant of the larvae of the barred-tooth stripe, then hopefully it will give that species some resilience in the Yorkshire Dales landscape. At this stage, the plants are growing on, the cuttings have worked. We need to get them planted out ASAP in woods that where Kay's made contact with landowners to do that sort of thing. So hopefully it's very experimental. It may work, it may not, but at least we've tried to kind of deliver some real conservation gains through that. It's not the only strand of the project by any means, but it's a little spin-off, if you like, in there. So, excuse me. The second of these working examples, if you like, is Cumbria's local nature recovery network. Now, I'm not going to talk too much about this because it's far from finalised as this. This is a working project. But if you want to know more about local nature recovery networks, these are a kind of new government, it's almost a scheme, it's almost a philosophy sort of thing. And basically it will replace to a large extent the old countryside stewardship agreements that were kind of scattered about here and there and targeted things at random. As far as I understand it, the local nature recovery schemes will be more about linkage and connectivity. They will, promote habitat creation and restoration. They will incorporate the tree planting, which everyone will be aware of, sort of thing. Peatland restoration will be big for kind of flood controls and obviously carbon capture and the rest of it. And the sort of natural flood management sort of thing. It's all very holistic. It's all about bigger sites, whole entire landscapes being managed for wildlife, and better connectivity sort of thing, which is fine, a fine set of ideals in principle. How it works in practice, it depends very, very much on the organisations and the staff that are tasked with delivering it. And of course, it depends on landowners as well, because without their goodwill, the success or failure will be, strongly reliant on goodwill from the people that manage the land. I think we've kind of touched on that very sort of idealistic outlook sort of thing. So, we kind of are looking really for species to include in that, because with the onus being on managing landscapes, there's a kind of almost a fear that, you manage, the thinking will be that you manage the landscape, the species will benefit sort of thing. But, with conserving moths and butterflies, particularly those with specialized habitat requirements, it becomes imperative that the actual needs of the individual species are catered for to some extent, because just to say that a suite of limestone grassland sites is grazed is not enough. It needs to be grazed in the right way, and it needs the right type of stock and the right timing if you have to deliver for orchid species like Duke of Burgundy, say, or for least minor, say, which doesn't seem to particularly like sort of hard grazed swards sort of thing. I'm not saying they would hard graze the swards, but you get where I'm coming from. And this idea of being better joined up kind of works in a way. I mean, you can see from this distribution map for Argent and Sable that essentially there's a kind of core of sites in the Midlands that survive. All these yellow and pale blue dots are you know, older records, shall we say. There's been a big retreat. This is a species that has two types of habitat. It lives on young birches in woodlands, woodland rides, coppice coops, plantation edges, things like that, or it lives on bog myrtle on uplands. And if we look at the bog myrtle sites, northwest Scotland, it's doing fine there. It's been discovered on more and more sites. So I don't think it's spreading. I think the survey efforts are kind of revealing, you know, as it to be quite a widespread species. But you look further south in England, where the habitat is predominantly young birch in kind of woodland settings, it's quite clear that this moth is faring quite badly in that setting. And you know, the further these sites are scattered from the core areas, the more likely they are to go extinct, it seems. So this idea of connecting sites, joining places up, is the kind of, you know, it tries to incorporate some resilience, if you like, into, you know, bigger meta populations, if you like. That's a picture by Keith Gittins, by the way. I've just put Keith's name up because it's probably my favourite photograph of Argent and Sable that I've seen. So thanks to Keith for that. Other species that we're kind of looking at to include, and this is not the full list by any means in the Cumbria Local Nature Recovery Scheme, is least minor. There are not many sites left at all in England. Most of them in Cumbria. It's important that this goes in because it does have quite specialised habitat needs. Oh, that's a white spotted sable. That's the little micro moth that lives in the Morecambe Bay limestone woodland sort of thing. That fits quite nicely with what we're doing already. This is Welsh clearwing. It's only been discovered at a couple of sites relatively recently in Cumbria, but we felt, or I felt, that it should probably be included on the list. And the reason for that is because of the kind of habitat it uses. It breeds, essentially, it has kind of larvae that I think feed between the heartwood and the bark of really quite mature birch trees. We're talking trees that are probably 40, 50 years old or older, which for birch is quite old. And, you know, those potentially, I mean, that tree on the picture is probably all right. But if you look at these ones from Wales, the photograph's not the best, and you can see that they're in a, you know, a habitat that's really quite degraded in conservation terms. It's a well overgrazed sheep pasture sort of thing. And if that was turned into, you know, a sort of wider tree planting scheme, which is possible, say, then those trees, which, you know, the moth seems to prefer scattered trees in a really quite an open landscape, if they got planted up round sort of thing, they would be probably lost as a breeding site for Welsh clearwing sort of thing. So you know, there are considerations as to what species to put forward for things like this. The last example, and this is probably the most difficult one I had to come up with for a list, was county wildlife sites in County Durham. Now, county wildlife sites or local nature conservation sites, they're known by different terms in different counties, but they're the series of sites that are of the next tier of protection down from sites of special scientific interest. They're kind of, you know, sites that are of local importance. They're not quite good enough or big enough or whatever in the condition that they would need to be triple SIs, but on a county level, they're pretty important. And going back into the dim, distant past, when I first started working for butterfly conservation back in about 2003, my predecessor, Sam Ellis, had managed to get species such as small pearl, dark green fritillary, green hair streak into the County Durham list of the sites, local sites on the local site register. So any site that supported populations of these butterflies could be designated as a county wildlife site. We then got dingy skipper added, which was a kind of big step forward in a way. This is a butterfly that's really well represented in the northeast. We did a lot of work back in 2005, 2006 that showed that the number of sites that it occupies were disappearing at a rate of 33% per decade, which is really, really high. You know, it's not a sustainable rate of loss in any terms, isn't that? These losses were mainly down to loss of brownfield sites, which were being redeveloped and built on, still are. Lack of management was problematic in some cases. You know, a lot of the sites, which started off as lovely kind of sparse grass, bird's foot trefoil, bare ground mosaic sort of thing that this species liked, were getting scrubbed up sort of thing. So, and there were about 130 to 150 occupied sites. Now, every one of those was adopted by the local council as a county wildlife site, which was a, pretty major undertaking, really, when you think about that kind of level of protection. Now, in 2019, pre-lockdown, I was contacted by the council who were keen to update their designations. So, and previously we'd had four or five butterflies. There was Northern Brown Argus was one of them as well, that sites could be designated to, but the council wanted to include moths as well, which was great. But how the hell do you kind of narrow it down to, which species are kind of relevant at county level? It's almost harder to do this on a smaller scale than it is on the entire north of England sort of thing. So we're able to go through the, hark back to the BC Regional Conservation Strategy and pull out things like Forester moth, because there's some very good Forester moth sites there. Least minor, there's a couple of least minor sites, and chalk carpet. Now, Forester moth is not present on many sites in County Durham. We've got a few. Two of them are Forestry Commission owned. They're not under any immediate threat. Least minor sites, one of those is under Forestry Commission management sort of thing, not at risk. It's also on sites managed by the National Trust, again, probably managed in quite an ideal way, not going to be built on or anything. Chalk carpet's certainly worth putting in because that is found in a couple of disused quarries, and as you're all aware, people see a big hole in the ground, they want to throw a load of rubbish into it sort of thing. That's the first thing that comes to mind. So any protection that we're able to apply through species presence, if you like, chalk carpet is going to reinforce, say, the presence of the dingy skipper sort of thing, and hopefully it kind of contributes to that notion of a guild of important species present on a site, which helps give it greater protection. Argent and sable's another one. Now, we've not got many argent and sable sites. Again, the one site that we know to be occupied or was recently, from where it was recently recorded, is Forestry Commission land. And again, there are things that could be done there to perhaps, improve the habitat for it. But in terms of protecting sites, it probably doesn't need too much. So things like least minor go in. But most of the least minor sites are triple SIs already. It's kind of worth putting it in because we might find it, on additional sites that we don't know about, sort of thing. And certainly Sisters Forest is another good example. It probably is worth putting in, but again, it lives on the coastal grasslands. These aren't places that are going to get built on. They're not going to get grazed. It's very, very difficult to see, apart from coastal erosion, which the county wildlife site isn't going to protect from. Quite difficult to see whether they needed to be in or not. I did put them in the end, but whether they needed it or not. And this kind of leads on. Now we're kind of moving on to more onto the kind of Yorkshire side of things now. We're kind of going to feed into that, but you know, things like grey shoulder knot. Now, for example, this little, for those of you who don't know County Durham, this little notch in the coastline here is the Tees estuary. I don't know if you can all see my cursor. So at the time of, this is the distribution of grey shoulder knot in 2016, you can see that in the county, it's a very, very rare record. And, you know, on the surface of it, you think that that species is so rare for the county, it should be used to designate these protected sites. But actually, if you look at the scatter of dots, these little tiny dark dots, a recent record sort of thing. And you can see that it's a species that's doing quite well. It just happens to be the northern and very northern edge of its range in County Durham. And you kind of question whether what the value is in listing a species like that in a strategy sort of thing. And it's not hard to envisage that exactly the same thing will happen with grey shoulder knot as happened with pale pinion, you know, sort of decade previously, and that a species that used to be very, very rare in the county has expanded northwards. You know, we can't possibly look to conserve and protect all those sites because it's so widespread now. And so you've got to kind of look for context in this. It's not just sufficient to look at how rare something is. It's also, you know, you need to be kind of looking at these strategies as to what you're hoping to achieve, what the purpose of the strategy is. The other question is, or another question, there's plenty of questions, is how random records are, sort of thing. If it's a, you know, if you're trying to protect a species that's a habitat specialist that always occurs in a certain type of habitat, then yes, you can protect those habitats. But if it's just a species that's kind of scattered through the countryside and is found here and there, almost at random sort of thing, that becomes very, very difficult and probably very, very pointless to try and protect the sites at which it's been seen. Other questions I had to address were things like how under-recorded species are. And there's a couple of things, you know, there's this thing here, which I was pleased to show off the other day, sort of thing, because I'm doing a talk because I'd found it then. I'd never seen one before. Neresia duplicella, and forgive the pronunciation, I was never taught Greek or Latin, so I have no idea how to pronounce the kind of scientific names of these things. But this is a case-bearing moth larva that feeds on sort of algae and lives on, you know, sort of essentially those kind of lovely old bits of wood that are covered in those grey algae sort of thing, grey lichens. And it's probably, well, it will be massively under-recorded. If I can find it, it's probably lots of other people could find it if they were kind of minded to look for it. They're tiny, tiny things, about 4 or 5 millimeters long. Similarly, this is Phaearis palestrana. It's an upland species, and it's not that many records in County Durham, but probably because people are not venturing far onto the heather moorlands to record it, sort of thing. It probably is quite a widespread species. And again, although they show up rare in the record lists, they're not necessarily things that, you know, we will be looking to protect sites. So I think the relevant questions to ask are, what threats do the species face? I mean, you know, dingy skipper is an obvious example. Brownfield species, redevelopment of brownfield sites is a threat. So we can look at rarity, how rare things are. Clearly, we do want to protect things that are rare, providing that rarity is genuine and it's not a consequence, you know, it's not a precursor of a species spreading northwards, say, or increasing generally. Might be worth identifying which species are under-recorded. You know, take those ones out of the mix, sort of thing. If they're species and the moth recorders are far more aware of than I am of which these species are likely to be, but there will be a lot that are very under-recorded. Clearly, species in sort of serious decline would be something to look at. Equally, you know, you should be asking, what are the causes? If the losses are widespread, across lots and lots of sites, then it's not likely to be an issue of direct habitat loss through land change or through habitat management. And you have to ask, can conservation be effective for those species that are just kind of being rolled back right across the range, that are just effectively disappearing from lots and lots of different sites in a short time frame? Because it's obviously a factor that's widespread that's kind of driving this. Conversely, things like brownfield specialists, site protections and habitat management could be really, really beneficial sort of thing. That would be a real gain if you could target action towards those species. There's a good question of whether you should include charismatic species or ones of local importance. I mean, double kidney, for example, is widespread further south, but in Yorkshire, I believe there's maybe 1 or 2 sites. And in fact, the north of England, there's only those 1 or 2 sites. So certainly, there's no real evidence, I don't think, of those sites being like a forerunner of a northward spread. They've been there a long time. They're just very, very isolated sites, and certainly you wouldn't want to see those lost because they're not going to be replenished from a movement influx from the south. And charismatic species are kind of worth including because they can be a great education and engagement tool. Things like forester moth, even things like burnet moths can, be a really good way of getting the public engaged in planting things and growing things and, basically protecting some decent bits of habitat that may not have the rarest species there. But the risk is if you go too common, if you start targeting things that are really, really common, it generates lots of work. You start getting emails about things that you maybe wouldn't want to prioritize that highly. And the selection process of the species that you're including might well be challenged, particularly if site protection's involved, sort of thing. If people, developers will start challenging some of these things if they become too all-inclusive, if you like, too many low priority species, and they'll say, well, what the hell, is this a really sound basis for protecting sites? So if, for example, you might want to include some of the pyrousters as a charismatic species because they kind of tend to be associated with good quality grassland habitats. I wouldn't say they're any more charismatic than poplar hawk moths, which are, if anyone's done any moth trapping with kids, well, you'll know what a fantastic draw that species is. But it is really widespread and it's really common sort of thing. So you may have to make some kind of value judgments over that. Okay. Sorry, I'm going to have to just drag the toolbar down. And you're also likely to, once you've compiled a list, if you like, of priority species for your, Yorkshire strategy, if you like, there will be an advisory requirements tagged on to those sort of thing. People will expect you to know what they should be doing for these species, what species require. If we're talking site protection, what mitigation might work if a site's being developed, what the developer have to do, if you like, to compensate for any loss of species or loss of habitat. You may get asked about what a sensible buffer zone around a site that supports one of these species might be in terms of, restricting threatening activity, if you like. You might be asked about how to survey for these things, particularly if you've got, ecological consultants, for example, who have been asked to, I don't know, survey a quarry for chalk carpet. They might want to know how they should go about finding chalk carpets, and it won't only be trapping chalk carpets by using lights in the flight period. You'll get them trying to meet deadlines of their bosses who want to know if they can survey for caterpillars at other times of the years, you know, there are all sorts of questions that come your way when you put yourself in the position of setting up a strategy. People want a hell of a lot of answers. You can look at the section 41 listed species. These are the old UK BAT list sort of thing. It's exactly the same as the old UK Biodiversity Action Plan, which contains a hell of a lot of moth species. But a lot of them are included on the basis that they were declining at the time the list was drawn up. And things like white ermine and buff ermine are in there purely because back in 2000 and whenever it was 2000, when the UK BAT list was compiled, those species were doing pretty poorly nationally sort of thing. But whether you would ever want to really prioritize those species is a moot point. Always worth looking whether you're dealing with a habitat specialist or a species that's just scattered, where it's just picked up occasionally. And does the rarity of the habitat specialist merely reflect that the conditions that it needs are rare sort of thing? I mean, it's true that dune species tend to be invariably classified as rare when you're looking at kind of occupancy of squares, because sand dunes tend to offer, only be found in a very, very thin strip near to the sea. There's a very finite amount of habitat available to species that live in dunes. They're always going to be rare because there's simply not much habitat. Again, you could fill any list, any strategy with a list of dune species, but would that be really the priorities you wanted to make? Again, I'm just throwing ideas out here. I don't have answers to all these questions. And again, it might affect the criterion for selection if you're using the number of occupied squares on a map. So anyway, we kind of gone full circle now sort of thing. I'm sure you're all tired of strategies and spreadsheets and all the rest of it sort of thing. I hope it's been interesting. It was kind of interesting for me to kind of think through all this and to review the ways in which the regional strategy has worked and ways in which it's fallen down sort of thing. And it basically just, it's, in a way it's tiring, but in a way it's a really useful means of kind of delivering conservation from some of these wonderful creatures which we all admire. So, it's a bit of a ball ache putting things together like this, but on the other hand, some good comes out of it sort of thing, which is really nice. So I think that kind of does me now sort of thing. I really don't know how that's gone down at all, because as I say, it's a talk I've not given before. I don't know how well it works. As I say, I'm not an expert, but I've done a lot of conservation work over the years sort of thing. So, it's just how the strategies can fit into conservation work, I think, is the overall flavor of it. Thank you.
Thanks, Dave. It totally bombed. Everybody's left. Not.
I bet I don't get too many questions.
Got two already.
All right.
Are you able to see the chat from there, or shall I shout them out?
Hang on. Chat.
Yeah.
I've got a comment about cycid moths. Only two recorders in sunny Lincolnshire.
Possibly records. I'm not sure there. Couple of questions there from Collect Tate.
Right. What do you think are the best mechanisms for joining habitats? Hedgerows, buffer strips, etc. Okay, let me think about it. It's a really good question. And it's possibly one I'm not best. I can tell you what I think. I don't know whether whether what I think is right. Hedgerows certainly, buffer strips work well as well. I think it depends on the habitats you're trying to join sort of thing. I think, for example, it's easy to see a hedgerow would form connection between woodlands, whether or not species kind of more affiliated with grasslands, for example, would use that in the same way. I guess buffer strips would work for those. I guess really it's about sort of maintaining a kind of very heterogeneous matrix, if you like. It's kind of not having anything in the matrix of unsuitable habitat that's entirely uniform, sort of thing. I think species and animals, plants generally are attracted to a lack of uniformity, if that makes sense. I'm not conveying that very well at all, sort of thing, but essentially you need to break up the countryside, and by breaking it up you will connect it better almost. Sorry, that's a really poor answer, but it's the best I can do.
Another one just arrived there. Have you seen?
Sorry, you've gone very faint there, Paul. Which one?
Okay. Did you have? There's a new one there from John Preston.
2 seconds. All right, about the cycle ways, cycle paths. Yeah, I think that's good observation.
I think we need to read the question.
Yeah, sorry, I am. Yeah, new linear routes for cycling and walking using less productive land, with the land take a minimum 10 meters wide and much wider where practical, linking urban areas to destinations. One way to get public support links carbon reduction, in brackets safe routes, more local visits, with health, exercise and nature, with biodiversity. Additional economic gain to landowners if they host businesses that serve the visitors. Potential varied scrubby areas, good grassland, wetland bits. Yep, I mean, that is absolutely sound, John. We've, particularly in the northeast, we've got a lot of disused railways that, you know, serve that function already. And some of those are really, really good, you know, habitats. Again, some of the small blue sites in Cumbria are the same sort of thing. So yeah, I would agree wholeheartedly with that.
Okay, question there from Julie Mason.
Yeah, got that one. Do you think that nature reserves and local wildlife sites should incorporate more moth habitat management? I think yes. I think there's a lot of moths, and this is something I probably should have touched upon more. There's a lot of moths where we don't actually understand their habitat requirements terrifically well, and until we kind of know more about the species, it's very, very difficult to confirm the kind of management that those species will benefit from. So I think it's as much a research requirement as a management requirement. I think, yes, manage for species that we know and understand, and you know, we can kind of get some ideas from, you know, high quality forester sites. It should be possible to create that habitat, judging by a couple of the sites that I've seen that have become occupied by forester moths. So we're further along the line of understanding far more with some species than we are others. But again, there are people who know a lot more about moths than I am, who could probably supply a better answer. We've got roadside verges for connectivity. Yes, again, there are, you know, probably verges that will be managed, could be managed better, but they will, you know, serve an important function. Certainly, you know, some of the kind of motorway verge systems are, you know, potentially will be, you know, really good habitats for all sorts of things. I'm sure they're kind of under-recorded due to the practicalities of putting bright lights out on a night on the embankments on a blind bend sort of thing. But yeah, I think that point's true.
There's one earlier question we both of us overlooked. Do you engage with farm advisors?
Yeah. Not across the board. I mean, you know, not throughout the whole of the north of England, but where there are, you know, sort of key areas where we work. So Kay would engage with farmers in the Dales. I've certainly talked to the ones in the North York Moors, and we kind of raise awareness of the species that are there. The guys in Morecambe Bay do the same. And well, butterfly conservation staff throughout the UK actually work with landowners, and the first thing is very often just to make, particularly with moths, is just to make them aware of what they have on the land, what value their land has, and generally that information is pretty well received, and they will, try and assist, if you like, to keep species there quite often.
We'll do two more, Dave, and then...
Okay, well, I've spotted one from Justine. I'll try and answer this one.
Good, I'm glad you can see that.
Yeah. How well do you think RAS and MRS data represent sites such as SSSIs? Are these data good enough for informing at a finer scale? I think it's patchy. I think for some SSSIs, the data are really good. I think there's a lot of SSSIs there where no one's ever tracked a moth in their life. There's been no sort of proper surveys done. I think it's really, really patchy. So I think it really, really varies from site to site, as you've probably discovered yourself.
Okay, final one. How are planning applications for housing, etc., monitored? Is there a risk that good habitat is lost before it can be protected?
No, absolutely, yeah. Yeah, and this is one of the important things about recording, sort of thing. If if the records aren't in the system, you've got very, very little chance of getting things readdressed retrospectively. Say, as happened near Barnsley, sort of thing, a six-belted clearwing population was discovered after planning permission had been granted. You wouldn't have a cat in hell's chance. Basically, housing applications will tend to override most protections available for butterflies and moths under existing systems. That's the overriding message, sort of thing. And I know it's something Alan Rodders mentioned to me many times about the need to kind of beef up the protections, and that's absolutely true. Very, very occasionally we do have successes in protecting sites in their entirety. It would need to be something pretty rare to achieve that these days. So, planning applications there are a suite of species that are, quite protected legislatively, things like badgers, bats, great crested newts, where developers are expected to essentially survey for populations. There are no butterflies and no moths that receive that degree of protection when it comes to development, unfortunately.
Right, I'm going to read this out because I think it'll be a good full stop to your talk. It's more of a statement than a question. Another method to enhance connectivity is buffer strips on riparian habitats. This also reduces erosion, improves water quality, reduces flooding, and provides more opportunities for sea trout.
Yeah, well, I'll drink to that. If my success rate was anything to go by last year, sort of thing, anything that improves conditions for sea trout has got to be good. Thanks for that observation, Paul.
Dave, thanks for that. Right, I've got one or two announcements to make before we say goodbye to Dave. Firstly, I'm going to some sad news. We've recently, last week, lost one of our most active members, a lady called Pauline Popley. And Pauline was an amazing lady who was involved with all aspects of nature, in particular with butterfly conservation. She was a transect walker, a moth recorder, and an active worker with the conservation team based up in North Yorkshire Moors and on the east coast there. And so our condolences to all her family and friends, from all of us here at Butterfly Conservation Yorkshire. She'll be sadly missable, Pauline. On to other things, and this is quite relevant to David's talk today, moth traps. We have a moth trap scheme going within the branch, whereby briefly we loan out moth traps and all the relevant paraphernalia to anyone who's interested in literally starting on the moth road, as it were. We provide help with identification and any sort of backup and support you need. That loan is for a whole year, and at the end of that year you have the opportunity to buy the trap if you wish, or just return it to us. So if anybody is listening who might be interested this evening, if they'll contact either me, Paul Davis, and you can find my details on the branch website on the committee, or Alan Rodder. Either of us can help you out there. Finally, a final Zoom talk in 2 weeks' time from Dr. Mark Collins. He's the chair of the Swallowtail and Birdwing Butterfly Trust. So expect some smashing photographs, I expect, and lots of colour and a lot of interest. So I think there are tickets still available for that if you want to get booking. Finally, Dave, thanks for that. I know it's been totally new to you, this talk. I found it absolutely fascinating. I find moths, the whole, I've only been with a moth trap myself for a couple of years now, and I find the whole experience both frightening, challenging, and wonderful. So, you know, just to give me this idea about what we can do with looking after our moth species, yeah, I think has been brilliant. So thanks for your time, Dave. Really appreciate it. Once again, thank you.
Yeah. Thank you all. And it's absolutely humbling how much some people know about moths, and I don't include myself in that at all. There's some real experts about who really take my breath away with the depth of their knowledge and application.
Okay, so thanks everybody, and have a good evening.